Hi, Pedro. How are you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks, Carlos.
Pedro is the COO of Winning Tree and the ORGiD bot. Is it ORGiD or ORG.ID? How do you call it?
Org.ID, so organizational ID.
Right. ORGiD also had like a kind of a nice, a nice ring to it.
Yeah,
So
different.
I guess you must be way better at explaining what it is that you guys do at Winning Tree and ORG.ID. So I'll leave it to you and then we can take it from there. For those listening, Pedro is an expert in a topic I'm very interested on, sovereign identity on the blockchain, which is basically what they're working on at the hardest with ORG.ID. So we'll be diving into that today. And yeah, I'll leave it to you to explain what it is that you do.
Sure. Do you mind if I backtrack a little bit? Because we actually started out working in the travel space and then hit on a problem that required us to start creating organizational ID for the businesses in the marketplace, right? So the Winding Tree started out of frustration of some of my co-founders. They had been working out of Y Combinator on a travel startup, and they ran into some challenges of accessing content. And this is not just for startups. So you look at any travel company, the number one obstacle to getting into the space is access to content, right? There's a few intermediaries that sit in the middle. They control the industry, they charge really high fees, and they make it almost impossible for startups to access that content. So they were doing a startup out of Y Combinator, and they kept running into these problems. And there was a question that my co-founder had an idea of, hey, what if we created an alternative to these three intermediaries that was open and everyone could use? And the question was, and he asked me, hey, do you want to help us to build this? And the question was, why would they trust us? Because, with traditional businesses, you start building something like this. You say, hey, it's all good stuff. It's all, for the good of the industry. But then you hike up the fees and really screw over the participants, right? Like Facebook had the famous promise to never sell data and all that kind of stuff. And we know how that went, right? So the idea was, why would they trust us, like all these, travel companies? And so we started looking for tamper-resistant technologies, which naturally led us to Ethereum. This was around 2016. We, to make a long story short, we published a manifesto for the community. We had a bunch of VCs join, and they were going right at the question of, yeah, this is all great. We love what you guys are doing. We just want to be able to sell data and charge fees later on. And we're like, no, that's the whole point. We're trying to create a decentralized alternative for travel businesses to connect with each other. And so we set off to create a marketplace. And that's where ID actually came in. So we realized that, all marketplaces have a few things in common, like a few key qualities or added value that they provide that makes it more easier to go through a marketplace rather than have people go direct, right? So if you look at Amazon, or if you look at Uber, any of the marketplaces you use today, they all provide discoverability. So a way to find buyers if you're a seller, if you're trying to sell something, or a way to find sellers if you have a product that you're offering, right? So discoverability, you have some safe form of payment that you know that you're going to get paid for providing the service. You have a settlement solution in place. And then finally, there's the element of trust. And this is actually, when we first built out the platform, we built it all on Ethereum. It was a disaster. It was very slow. It was very expensive. This was actually the piece that was the hardest to do with a centralized system. You could do discoverability very easily in a centralized way, and it works very well. You could do payments through a centralized solution, and there are existing decentralized solutions for payments as well. But the trust issue was a big one. And so we started looking around for ID for businesses, and we found that all of the ID projects, decentralized ID projects, were for individuals, right? So they were tackling, now you have Proof of Humanity, you had Uport, you had Civic. There were a bunch of different projects attempting to do IDs, with varying levels of centralization or decentralization, but none of them were building ID for businesses. So the only business registries that existed were more on a government level. So if you looked at what Estonia was doing, I don't know if you've looked into that, the e-business.
Not too deep, but yeah, like it's well heard that Estonia is very much diving into blockchain head first, right?
Yeah, they have a really cool business registry where you can set up a business from anywhere, and they send you the tools to prove, like to cryptographically sign, signatures so you don't have to do anything in paper. It's all digital. It's really smooth, real easy, real great user interface. But it's Estonian government controlled. It's not really useful outside of Estonia. So even if you have a business there, another country will not recognize it, right? You still have to do all the paper signing and all the traditional old school stuff, KYC and everything. So we were looking for something, we couldn't find anything. So we decided, hey, we have to create something, because we were creating a marketplace for travel businesses to connect with one another. So Lufthansa to be able to make their flight inventory available to startups, which is where we started, but to not get spammers and scammers trying to abuse their content, right? Or any other travel supplier to be able to sell their inventory without getting screwed over by malicious actors. So we started looking for a solution that could establish trust in this marketplace, and we created Org.ID. So Org.ID is a decentralized business registry where instead of going through KYC with a third party, so WindingTree is not a third party that does KYC for these businesses. We just created the smart contracts, which are all open source, interfaces and everything that are open source as well. And it's completely free, where a business can go and self-verify using verifiable claims. So they can, prove that they own the website for their business. They can prove that they own the social media accounts. They can stake cryptocurrency to prove that they're not a spammer, because it would get expensive to start, impersonating a bunch of businesses because the money's stuck. And then that way, it's very cheap and easy for a business that's legitimate to prove, hey, I really am Lufthansa, or I really am, Hilton Hotels. And then for a travel agency to say, hey, I'm a real legitimate business that wants to consume your inventory and, sell travel in a new, interesting way. That would allow for businesses to connect direct without the big intermediaries that I described in the beginning, right? That charge, 30%, some horrible fees, and they use really old tech, green screen legacy systems that really hold the industry back, right? So that's a really long way to describe how we got to Sovereign ID and how WindingTree started.
Well, behind every Telegram bot, there's a great story. But what I would want to ask you, because I was researching your project and your products and everything for this interview, right? And a lot of questions arise when you're just looking at it. And at first, I think it's very normal to be a bit skeptic, because it's just a new approach to do things, or an approach that hasn't been done before. And for me, there are a lot of, some might say, dumb questions, but that actually need clarifying in order to understand the importance of both sovereign identity on the blockchain and the approach that you're taking. So that said, you decide to introduce a paying barrier, right? Like, in order to verify yourself, you have to stake your tokens to become sort of recognized, and you also have to install the code that proves that it is actually you on your website. So can you talk a bit more about this process? Yeah, clarify it so for everyone listening.
So if you're looking at the businesses on marketplace.windingtree.com, you'll see that there's varying levels of how verified they are. So Kleros has staked some tokens. They've verified their social accounts, their website, and then you have some that have just really set up their company on there, puts the information about their business in the smart contract, and that's pretty much it, right? Well, and then you have others that have verified much more. So it's really up to each business to decide how verified they want to be. So you're not required to stake tokens, right? But obviously it makes you look more legitimate and harder for somebody to impersonate you, right? So yeah, so businesses can choose how much they verify. You're not required to do any one of them. And then also, if let's say I'm a hotel and I want the businesses that access my content to have a certain standard of verification, I can require that, right? So everybody chooses how they work. Because the idea is really to connect businesses to each other directly without a middleman. That's what we set off to do in the first place, right?
Right. And well, it's full of scammers out there, obviously. Like you just have to go into sign up for an airdrop and figure out that everyone's a bot or a dummy, or you're not interacting with actual companies or actual people, more like actual people. People do not impersonate companies that much. But I personally see that there's a lot of interest here in that area, in that regard, because blockchain companies or crypto projects, they tend to do airdrops, they tend to do these dynamics where they actually give out money, and they want to know that they're giving it away to real people that can become real users, right? So is there anyone currently using the bot for this kind of stuff?
So actually, when I described Org.ID to you, that was like the core protocol for Winding Tree. That's what we use for these big enterprise businesses to connect with each other. The Org.ID bot itself came about as a use case for us originally. So we actually started building our Telegram community. I don't know, it was 2000 beginning of 2017, right? And back then there was a lot of scammers, and there were like a good 2 years where the scammers kind of fell asleep, right? There wasn't that many of them for the most part. They were less active, right? But
Right.
with the rebound in crypto, we noticed a bunch of impersonators coming in and reaching out to the community and trying to get money from them, and all kinds of like, hey, we've got, I'm Pedro and it's some impersonator, and we have a new initiative now that everything's recovered, and going around lying to people, right? So we were thinking like, wait, how do we fix this? This is really annoying. And since we already had Org.ID set up for these businesses to use between each other, we thought, hey, why don't we create a bot that's free, it's open, just like everything else we do. And it would search the Org.ID registry for a list of company representatives. Because we already had like units in place where, let's say, a big hotel chain could have subunits for all their the individual hotels that are owned by by other businessmen or whatever. But the Org.ID bot would search a list of just the company representatives. And that way, if somebody tries to impersonate us, our community would just shoot the name over to the bot, and the bot would say, this person's not, this person is associated with Winding Tree, and Winding Tree is verified in so many ways. And if he's an impersonator, it'll just say this business is not registered in Org.ID. And then we saw, hey, this works pretty well, for our community. People are able to check, scammers and spammers right away, super fast. And it's really simple. It's, it doesn't require any kind of complicated, KYC. It doesn't require giving away any information as an individual, which is kind of the annoying part with a lot of ID projects, right? That's kind of one of the concerns. With right to be forgotten and a bunch of other, leakage out there. So what I think is neat about it is that it's super simple, and it's the business that does the verifying, and then they say these are the people that I authorize to speak on my behalf or so on.
Okay, I think there's also a very good case for sovereign identity on the blockchain for business when there is a fear or there is a possibility of censorship, right? That's what because one would think, or someone that's not too into blockchain or into these decentralized alternatives would think that, okay, what's the difference between they being verified by Org.ID or them just having a blue tick on Instagram, right? But Instagram can effectively delete you or delete your account, and YouTube can censor you.
Not that they would do that, right?
Not that they would do that, then they haven't been known to do that at all. Or if your business starts representing a threat for them or anything. And you go into this line of thinking and you start thinking, well, if there is going to be a growing curve here, it's most likely going to be like Bitcoin, right? Like first you start with the most illegitimate things being adopting these kind of things, and then you move on to the mainstream. Have you seen, or have you considered this? Have you seen any trend towards interest in sovereign identity for other types of use cases?
That's actually a big thing. So when we were travel first, like we were building solutions for the travel space and specifically for enterprise. And it was what you described, one of those issues of trust. There's a really good book. It's actually very, very, I guess, invigorating and exciting book, even if you're not in the travel space. It's called Hard Landing. And it basically goes from airline industry, from like the barn hoppers, like when planes were like mail planes that would land in people's barnyards and like drop off mail and fly up, and they started adding seats to it, to where we are today with airlines, you know, being practically government entities, right? And in that book, there's a really interesting part where American Airlines created a system, distribution system, that allowed for the airlines to make their content available really easily through travel agencies, right? And it was the system, it was, you know, the first big computer system like this, and they were giving it to all the travel agencies, and then other airlines started to use it. And this is where the censorship resistancy piece came in, is there was an aha moment when they said, wait a minute, we can move like any of the other airlines to the bottom of the list and move ours to the top all the time, even if ours isn't the best price or the best route or, you know, the most convenient flight or whatever. We can just move ourselves to the top and we win. And, you know, the rest is history. The GDS, the Global Distribution Systems are called now, Sabre. It broke out of, you know, American Airlines. It became a huge giant in the space, makes much more money than, you know, the airlines do. And then there were two others that set up, Travelport and Amadeus. But this was the classical case of tamper and censoring, where they're like, hey, we could just move our stuff to the top, take control of the industry. And so that's why for us, the trust issue was the most important in creating a marketplace, because the moment that we have the power to do that, to say one business should be higher, the whole thing is flawed, right? So the travel industry definitely has a need for that. But when COVID hit, the travel industry went from being one of the largest industries in the world, you know, 8 trillion or whatever, to like nothing. They got, you know, decimated in 2020. We all got hit, but travel was really, really hit. Our newsletter was 70,000 travel executives. Over the course of, you know, February, March, April, it dropped to like 40 or 35,000. It was very, very hard hit, right? So a lot of people were laid off, and they're just now starting to hire pilots back, and kind of even the innovation team, developer teams. Airlines did away with whole, you know, the programmer and innovation teams were just like, forget that, right? So when we were in the middle of that, we were like, hey, you know, we have Org.ID, and obviously we're ready to launch, but the travel industry is kind of going through it right now. So we started looking at alternatives, and we're actually very open, like, because we can't control it, so it's something others can use. And we were looking at some use cases in, you know, health passports, because you have issues of trust there. And we had some organizations reach out to us. There's also in music, for example, there's loyalty issues and so on that can also be solved with, there are also issues around trust there, especially between businesses and everything. But we realized, because travel started kind of recovering, and a lot of the businesses started coming back to us and saying, hey, we want to do something since it's dead. Some big corporations said, hey, we want to book around the intermediaries, because now more than ever, we're trying to cut costs. And we really don't want to go through those guys. Before, they were kind of more like slow about it. So our attention got pulled back into travel. But I am very interested in seeing how this could be used more outside of travel. And that's when, with the Telegram bot, we thought, hey, the crypto community, I'm sure there are other projects out there who are suffering from these like spammers and scammers, and nobody wants to use something complicated, right? So we started, we kind of just published it out, and a few projects have started using it as well, right? So I see a use case for the bot for crypto communities outside of travel. I think reporters can use it as well. So you have cases where somebody will impersonate a reporter and try to raise funds and say, hey, you know, I donated to this project in Ukraine, and here's the Bitcoin address. You guys can go donate too. It's a really great cause, and they divert the attention away to the cause, and then people are like, oh, great, let me just send to that address, and then it turns out it was an impersonator, right? So they could also, you know, reporters could be verified by their whatever media company. Those are the official social accounts for them. There are other applications, but it's kind of like it's out there, kind of like the internet, right? We use this comparison because I know a lot of companies use the word, like, especially in 2017, we're going to create the internet and so on. But this is specifically for travel, and it really is the way for these businesses to communicate with each other, because they have their identity, They can sign transactions and prove that they sign that they really are, the company they claim to be. It has all the functions that they can communicate and connect to each other. Because it's kind of open source, decentralized and everything, anyone else can take it and start using it in their industry.
I was just wondering, because before you said, and from a more technical standpoint, so no need to spend a lot of time there, but you said you are not using Ethereum anymore. So what is it that you're using these days?
No, we do use Ethereum. What I meant by that comment was for the elements of a marketplace, so discoverability, payments, and trust. Discoverability, being able to list and see others, that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is controlling the identities of the businesses on the marketplace, right? So if I do KYC, I can vet who comes into the marketplace and who doesn't. And that the ORG.ID bit and the trust we did on Ethereum. But the payments, they can be done on Ethereum, but between travel businesses, we can also we also have an entity that processes payments. And that's not, it uses ORG.ID, but it's not, Ethereum based and completely decentralized and everything, right? So the other elements don't have to be completely decentralized, but trust does. That's what I was saying. Yeah, but yeah, Ethereum has its challenges too. Like I was looking at the transaction cost for that one transaction to set up your wallet, and there were some people complaining about it. But I mean, it's just the Ethereum transaction cost. It was like $200, right? So it's gone down a little bit, but still, it's quite volatile, those costs.
Well, yeah, Ethereum scalability is the whole topic on itself, right? We don't need to go talk about that, mostly because we cannot do anything about it right now. But we're hoping for the layer 2 solutions to come up for Ethereum 2.0 to hit. What I'm wondering here is, you can effectively, with a service like this, mostly from a user point of view, not really from a company's point of view. And I do see a lot of benefit with companies having sovereign identity on the blockchain. But from users would be able, if they have 2 Telegram accounts, if they have 2 Twitter accounts, if they have 2 whatever, they would end up being able to create duplicate accounts, right? I would be able to bypass the system and have 2 separate identities, let's say, although it's harder. So how do you combat this, or do you see this as an issue?
No, that's fine. Like an individual can have all the identities they want. The business would only list their official ones, the same as, if you have and it goes for email too. It's not just Telegram bot. So ORG.ID bot can also, the company can list, these are the emails of our employees without actually showing them. Like the bot can verify which individuals are actual representatives of the company, and it can connect any of their social media accounts, not just their Telegram. And if you have a personal account, then that's your personal account. It doesn't have to be on the ORG.ID bot. And when you shoot that personal account, it won't show up as somebody associated with Mining Tree. And also, one individual can be associated with multiple organizations. So I could work for example, Ethereum Foundation and I don't know, ETHCC or ETH Denver or something. I don't know if they have an entity, but I could be represented under 2 organizations as well as an individual.
Okay, you see. Okay, well, I'm trying to phrase this in the best way. I might not be able to, but you see, when does this classify, first of all, before I go on that route, does this classify as zero knowledge?
No. I mean,
not really, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the business saying, hey, we proved ourselves. And then it's actually, the opposite. It's very, very public. So businesses, they want to be public about, their actual websites and where to contact them and everything, right? So they verify that they publicly post the transaction saying that, hey, this is really us on ORG.ID. They verify themselves, and then they list all the individuals on a file for who's in their company, right?
Okay, yeah, because what I wanted to say is that I see every day more and more that a lot of companies and a lot of institutions and a lot of everything have my data. And yeah, they know too much about me. And cleaning up the spam folders right now is becoming a bit of a problem when there's so many years of online tracking. So is there anything that these sovereign identities on the blockchain can do to limit the exposure that individuals have to companies and institutions knowing about them or being able to reach
I
them?
most definitely individual IDs can do that. I think that that's the whole promise of sovereign identity, decentralized, identity. And again, there's a lot of projects out there doing that. It's the dream, right? To be able to any checkpoint, just show the exact information. You're going into a club. Is this person over 18, over 21, or whatever the rule is in the jurisdiction? And just yes, not, am I male or female, where was my ID issued, and numbers, and all those dates and everything. All it needs to do is check the date and say yes, right? And then they don't need to store anything. They just grab that one piece of information. And I think that's the real beauty of decentralized identity, and something we're really excited about. And so far we haven't touched anything on personal identity, namely because our biggest problem was between businesses, and we were connecting these enterprises with each other. And our real, like I mentioned, the connection with individuals is just saying, hey, these are the people working at the company, so that it's harder for people to impersonate them, right? But I think that somebody's going to nail it, and it's going to be great when they do. But it's not something we're doing, like the personal ID and zero knowledge proof and so on. In fact, if you do a booking through like a startup that's using Winding Tree or anything, we don't actually touch any of the personal data of the user, and we don't store any of it. It's all done direct between the two parties. So the website, the startup, whoever's selling the booking to you as a traveler, wherever the interface that you are, and then the hotel, the airline, the car rental company, whatever, we're just connecting them to each other directly, and we're not holding on to any information between them.
Okay, can we touch a bit on the part of staking tokens? How does it work, and why do companies benefit from doing this?
So our goal when we were creating Org.ID and coming up with the verifiable claims was we wanted to make it as easy as possible for a legit company to set up and prove that they are who they claim to be, and then as expensive and difficult as possible for a malicious actor, right? So, okay, website. If you already have an existing company website, it costs you nothing. If you're a scammer or spammer, okay, you have to go buy a domain name or that sounds almost like it, and you have to go copy the pages and everything. Okay, that's one. Then with the social media accounts. And then with the website, so we use Whois to figure out when the website was created. So if I tried to create Winding Tree with an L instead of an I, it would say, this was created like 2 minutes ago or whenever it was created. Whereas the legitimate one would be much further back, right? So if all you did was verify your website, you would really just have that Whois thing to kind of hide behind, which isn't very much. So if you've gone as far as validating your, verifying your social accounts, that's a little bit more, because, you have to go and at least farm those users to make it look like you have, whatever. I saw one group that the fake group had more than the real group, and so like they do it, but the scammers and everything, I think it was like 16,000, but still it was impressive that it was more than the fake one had 18,000 or something. But anyways, so you have to go and farm all those the fake users, and the more social accounts that you verify, the more farming you have to do to go create all those fake users, make it look legit and everything. And then it's usually pretty easy to just look at that account and see, oh, this is fake, right? So, okay, you have two layers there. You have the social accounts, you have the website. But then we thought, like, how can we make it really simple for a real one, for a real business, but then annoying for a fake one? And so if they stake tokens, this is super easy for a real business. It's like, okay, I just park some money in there, kind of the way that you put a coin in the shopping cart, like at Aldi's or something like that, right? And then when you get the cart back, so you don't have to chase, so the next person doesn't have to chase it in the parking lot, you put it in, and you take out your quarter or whatever. So that's the idea we had in mind. You put in 1,000 lift or whatever, and a few months later, you can pull it out, or you can just leave it in there, depending on how long you're using ORG.ID. Whereas a malicious actor, if he's trying to scam, he's going to have to do all of that, plus stake this money that's going to be parked on there until and then wait for that project, that scam attempt to go down, and then go try to collect that money back. So it's a lot more involving. And then to take it a step further, we're using Clearos, the decentralized arbitration platform, for as like a courtroom for checking if one of the ORG.IDs is really malicious, acting maliciously, they could lose money as well. So on top of just the inconvenience and the cost of like staking in a bunch of different places and getting that money stuck, you could actually lose that money if it's proven that you're a malicious actor. So it starts to get pretty exciting around all those, and it's possible to add more verifiable claims as we go. So we have the permissions, I think, for Twitter, and we're waiting on the one for LinkedIn for verifying officially through there. We can also add certifications. So a certifying entity could say, yeah, this is really an IATA certified airline, or a city could say this is a real restaurant, and so on, right? So all of that can be done on there as well.
I mean, scammers, impersonators. This is sort of a business that it's associated with certain nations and with certain nationalities, right? Because in the end of the day, these are things that people in developing countries do because it's actually they can make a living from trying to scam people in first world nations, right? In more developed countries, sort of just because of the economics makes sense, right? But as soon as you introduce risk into the equation, then it might not be at all profitable for me to jump and try and scam people for US dollars when I'm spending in rupees, just because if I may lose my initial deposit in dollars, then I'm effectively losing money by going out and scam people. So I think this is a real smart solution, sort of deals with that part, with the part that, yeah, if I live in a developing nation and I can go and try and scam people on the internet all day long and I make $5, it's actually worth my time, right? But I'm considering here, to be able to do this, to be able to make this a working system, you need users to actually build the habit of going on the bot and start checking on whether the site is registered. And of course, you have to be big enough for a lot of sites to be registered there. So how are you going about the process of making people adopt this solution?
So that's a very good question, and it's something that we're still figuring out as we go. And we're using it with our community. That was the main goal for launching the ORG.ID bot. And ORG.ID itself, as a marketplace and a decentralized business registry, we're using for travel businesses. And there are some really big, some of the largest corporations in the world, Fortune 500s, using it to connect to other businesses, right? So that's in itself is really exciting. But as far as like getting other crypto projects, that was a recent thing with Telegram bot, like sharing it out. With the projects that have signed up, yeah, educating the community is the challenge. And what we're doing, we have an upcoming promotion. We haven't announced it yet, but we'll be basically talking to the founders of those projects about penetration testing their community. So reach out, we'll impersonate them, reach out to an odd number of people in that group and see which one of the ORG.IDs passes the best, phish or scam resistant health test. And then we would give them a reward for being the most well-educated community, right? So if I reach out to your community and everybody's like, hey, no, you're not, Carlos, I checked and, that's not your real social account. And everybody, 10 out of every 20 or do that, that's already a good sign, right? If I reach out to community and nobody's doing it, then we know that, like, these guys, obviously whatever they did didn't work, right? So we're going to be doing a promotion around that with some rewards to see how the different communities do.
Right. And so back to travel a little bit. As a user trying to go on vacation, wherever, I go into the marketplace, I see the company that have already signed up. What's the process like for me going from there? Or what do I gain in my experience that isn't an extra step, rather than just going on Google and searching for their website, let's say?
So you're asking, like, how do I book like direct with businesses without going through third parties, or how do you book with Winding Tree? What's your question exactly? I didn't understand.
Yeah, like from a user experience point of view, if I'm going into ORGiD to see or into Winding Tree rather, on the marketplace, and see what hotels, what companies, what everything is listed in there, isn't that effectively adding steps to the process? Isn't that making it harder for people?
So what we do is it's a B2B solution. So it's distribution, connecting these businesses to each other without intermediaries, helping them to go direct and making it really scalable. So like if you're, Fortune 500 and you do $500 million of travel a year, and you're paying, 20, 30, whatever percentage to intermediaries, that's a ton of money, right? And so you want to connect directly to the airlines and to the hotels. But to go and do an integration directly with each one, there's no standard for any of these industries. So everybody has their own style of APIs. They have a standard, but everyone has their own interpretation of how it's implemented. So it's almost impossible to just do one. It is impossible to just have one approach and try to connect to everybody, right? So everyone has their own approach to the APIs. You have to go around and try to build these, and it becomes a whole business in and of itself. And that's why there are aggregators out there. There's a bunch of them, and they all raised, like, the last couple of years, over 100 million in funding, these aggregator startups, right? Where they're like, oh, we'll collect all these APIs. And they have anywhere from 10 to 20 airlines under them, but they're essentially a middleman because they'll start charging fees and everything too, right? What we said is, like, hey, we'll just make a marketplace that doesn't charge anything. Everybody goes on there. They can connect directly to each other without any of those fees. And they can even connect to those aggregators all under one place. And it's all normalized. They have all the tools they need to, find the other businesses, choose who they want to connect with, negotiate with them with the trust in a trusted environment, settle payments, everything all under one roof. And it's super easy and simple. For a consumer, we were never like a B2C platform. So it's not like a website that you go and book. We did create one, glider.travel, so you can check it out. It's open source, it's decentralized, we charge no fees. The traveler can go and book content that's coming directly from the suppliers. It's the only place in the world. So it's kind of like almost like a fair trade marketplace, where you have no intermediaries, you have like no like nothing in between. It's just you buying straight from the source, from the farmers, in the Amazon that are growing the beans, right? So it's fair trade travel. But that's not like our goal was never B2C. We created that booking website just to show the businesses that are connecting what they could potentially do, and they can even use the source code for what we did with Glider Travel as a primer for getting started, right?
With these marketplaces, I'm sure more than one person must be thinking, what's the business model if you're not selling people's data and you're not collecting fees?
So Winding Tree is 100%. It's 100% free to use. Doesn't charge anything. And we were funded by the community to build out something to solve a big problem that hurts and touches all of our lives, right? Like if you think about travel, it's the only space where you spend a couple $1,000s on something, get treated like cattle, herded around, delayed, canceled, stopped, and you're kind of just okay with it because that's what you expect, right?
Yeah.
Last night, I have a flight that was supposed to be early this morning, and I was trying to change it last night to Sunday, and their systems were down. I won't mention the airline, But I literally, I was calling, it took me about an hour to get in because there were apparently a lot of people calling because they couldn't get through on the website. So I spent like an hour on the website, couldn't do it, called, still couldn't do it. The guy tells me to call back in an hour. So I'd set an alarm for like 2 a.m. to call back the guy. And I call back and they're like, oh, finally the systems are working here. Let me change your flight. Like there's really no other industry where you can have that kind of pain and it's okay and acceptable, right?
Right.
They actually had to come up with laws like, hey, if your flight's delayed by so many hours, then they have to give you some kind of a refund. You don't have that in other spaces because it just doesn't happen, right? So it's an industry that hurts and touches all of our lives. And so the community funded it for the sake of solving this big problem, which all starts with distribution, because you will not have innovation in travel until you have open access and a competitive environment, because there are no new entrants to the market until you open and democratize access to inventory, right?
And when you say the community funded it, you mean?
So we had an ICO back in the beginning of 2018. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm surprised. I mean, that was the best time to raise money, right? Through the community. That was effectively the time. But I'm surprised that they were, the community, the crypto community was passionate about raising funds for a B2B business or for a B2B model. What's further down the road? What else are you guys planning to do as you continue to develop the project?
So right now we have a big focus on solving some of the problems. Like we've delivered on creating ORG.ID, the solution, right? So it works, but we have a lot of things that we need to clean up in terms of making it easier for users. So right now with MetaMask, for example, it's very hard for travel industry folks to get used to using something like that. So we have an issue where they want to ask us to create it for them. And we're kind of like, well, that defeats the whole decentralization question, right? So there's some issues there around making the user interface smoother and cleaner and easier to work with, documentation, and then also use cases on top of it, right? So businesses can be built on top of Winding Tree that can be profitable and can make good money and provide a lot of value for the community, for other travel businesses, and for travelers themselves, right?
Speaking more about the future, I think we can start wrapping up with this. Speaking about the future of blockchain and the future of decentralized marketplaces, how do you see marketplaces evolving over time to accommodate to blockchain technologies and to accommodate to these more direct peer-to-peer relations?
So I think it's 100% critical that all marketplaces, well, at least the ones that I have in mind, like the ones we use every day, that they move to a decentralized model. I was seeing that, I forget the name of the project, but there was a project that's trying to tokenize attendance to concerts, right? With NFTs
Right.
and everything. I can't remember the name, but I used to work in the travel space. So for me, that was very interesting. Like, yeah, that's awesome. It would be great to see this, right? But the problem is that a lot of the current marketplaces, they just have better interfaces and they work very smoothly. It's so convenient that there's still a long way to go to getting users to like, you take even a decentralized exchange versus a centralized exchange, right? Like Uniswap. I love Ethereum. I'm a huge follower. I love Uniswap and what they're doing, but like the user interface is still pretty rough. There's still a lot of issues. There's some bugs that need to be, serious bugs that need to be fixed. You take, Winding Tree, with the fact that it's so hard for travel industry folk to get used to the whole acquainted with the blockchain usage and setting up their MetaMask and everything, which I guess the community needs to learn, but it also shouldn't be very hard, right? You don't have to be a blockchain person or a crypto community member to be able to use the tools. It should be really, really easy, right? So I think there's a long way to go, but I think that marketplaces need to move towards that. Why? Like if you look at the examples that I used earlier, like Amazon, Apple, Uber, they can all turn around and screw over the participants and do it in a big way, right? Like if you look at Amazon, they can, and they do, right? They can, they see a product that's selling really well, and they can say, actually, hey, why don't we set up, let's say light bulbs are selling, LED bulbs are selling really well. And they say, oh, we'll set up a company, we'll move it to the top, we'll move those guys down, make them look like crap. And then we win. And they can just keep growing and scaling that way. Same thing with Apple. They can choose which businesses to delist if it's competitive, or they disagree with the color or the hair of the founder or whatever. They have a lot of power. And in the case of Uber, they can completely do away with drivers, right? And just be like, yeah, we'll just have self-driving cars. That's our supplier space, boom, down, out. And that can happen with even travel companies. With the intermediaries today and the amount of leverage they have over users, and the fact that Google is coming in so strongly to the travel space, they could eventually just own the travel space and even own the planes themselves, which is like the holy grail of the airlines. Like at least we own the planes, right? But the marketplaces that are owned by manipulators and mediators are dangerous. And I think that the future will be a decentralized marketplace in most senses. I'm hard pressed to find a marketplace that wouldn't benefit from it.
And I think that's the best place to wrap up, right? Because in the end, like you said, companies have problems wrapping up their minds around this. And people, even myself, sometimes have problem wrapping my head around peer-to-peer marketplaces. And that's in part because, as you said, first of all, the business models sometimes are more complex than traditional business models. And second, because the user interfaces are not there yet. But there's a very big need for these things. They're definitely the future. And as we see more and more people get screwed up by big players, we're going to see more and more of these peer-to-peer marketplaces arise. So Pedro, I know you have to leave. So if you want, can you let people know where can they learn more about the Org.ID bot? Where can they learn more about WinningTree, about yourself, whatever you would like them to ask them to do?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to winningtree.com/Org.ID bot, or on Telegram, join our group and message directly to the Org.ID bot himself, /Org.ID bot Org.ID_bot. And you can check any user that you're communicating with if they've set up an Org.ID. It's still young, so not as many communities as I would like are using it, but certainly if you're part of the WinningTree community or any of the ones that are already set up, it's a very, very valuable tool. Yeah, we'd love to see you on there and hear your stories of how it's benefiting you and helping you.
All right, cool, man. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on this interview?
No, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me, Carlos. And yeah, we're looking for other crypto projects that have communities to set up your Org.ID, and early stages, a lot of hand-holding and helping. So if you just reach out to us, pedro@winningtree.com, I'll help you set up and get your Org.ID going so you can protect and screen your community from phishers, scammers, and spammers.
All right. Thank you very much, then. And thanks everyone for listening.